Hi, I'm Valerie Englehart, and in this video, I am going to be painting a mythical creature. This is a griffet, and a griffet that I usually see online is kind of like a mix between like a pigeon and a rat, but in this case, I am inspired by pot roast. Now, if you don't know who pot roast is, don't be alarmed. I'm not sure anyone that I've announced, I'm painting pot roast to has gotten it. But I really like this book that I just finished as an audiobook called Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldtree. And he is the narrator of that book, does a fantastic job, as well as being the author. And it is the sequel/prequel to Legends and Lattes. So if you like Dungeons and Dragons and you just want like a cozy, feel-good story, I definitely recommend that series. Now, so this is actually a bit of fan art. I wanted to treat myself to just doing something fun and without any, nobody absolutely needs me to paint pot roast. And that's what made it fun. I don't have any shows that I'm doing this for. It's just weird fun. So, pot roast, in my imagination, as described in the book, I imagined an owl, and I will disclose that the cover of the book definitely paints the idea of what you're going to be envisioning. So there's that. But I did want to go off my imagination of a snowy owl and a pug. So essentially what I'm painting is a chimera of a snowy owl head with snowy owl wings and the body of a pug and like kind of fluffy pug bird talons when I get to that point. I guess I should describe what I'm doing with this painting. As you can see, the right eye is really loose and kind of blurred into the paper, whereas the left eye is far sharper with hard edges. That is because to try to place things out, since I don't typically sketch first, is I just put water on the page where one of the eyes was gonna go, and then just went straight in. And I kind of like that diffused look anyway, because I can go over it later with some hard lines. And then that way that color melds into the face feathers and just creates a more seamless, less paint by numbers kind of look. I've also put in the beak, I've used lunar blue, because even though snowy owls are kind of like that black and white, I wanted to still use a dark value, but something with a little more color, so I went with the lunar blue. And to create the mouth, I didn't want to paint just a straight line, so I dotted the line so that it had texture and kind of looks like feathers falling over the mouth. And the face is white because I used a snowy owl reference, but even white feathers have some color in it from reflecting what's around it. It'd be kind of boring if it was just flat white paper, so I'm going in very lightly with that lunar blue and just giving some shadow, some more form to pot roast's face. The eyes were painted using Rockwell Canada Magic Wizard and dropping in some Rockwell Paliba Diamond Blue. Those are my two favorite colors, and I love using them in combination in a lot of my work. Now I've pulled out that lunar blue again and am putting the little like dotted feathers on top of pot roast's head. So right now, if you didn't know any better, it just looks like I'm painting an owl. But don't worry, since I'm working on the head right now, I'm pretty soon going to move on to placing where those ears are going to be. And I want those ears, they're described as being like flat against the griffet's head, but triangular. So that's what I do. I'm eventually just going to put like little flat ears like I've seen on pugs, or even like a Scottish fold cat. I'm adding a little bit of the Magic Wizard into the feathers just to warm up some places, give it just a little more visual interest. And that's another tip when painting, is to If you have a color somewhere, drop it in other places of the painting to create some harmony. So here I am going in now with my dark value and putting in one of Pot Roast's ears. Going in with the other ear now, picking up the same colors and just creating that little triangular shape. And that's what's important with painting, to not get too, or really any sort of art, to not get too hung up on what you think an ear looks like. Think in terms of shapes. This is a triangle-ish. It is a curvy triangle. Now I'm adding a lot of water to that side because I want the paint to bleed into the background, and that's why I've lifted up my paper, just letting it flow back into the background to create a very dreamy, loose look. And I forgot to add, this is actually the largest painting I've ever done at 18 by 24 inches. So I'm christening a new block of paper with a... Hi, Valerie here. I just wanted to pop in real quick and ask, do you want to paint with bold, vibrant watercolor? Well, I teach you how to paint this beautiful, dare I say, elegant elephant using bright tube paints and lovely texture effects. Just go down to the link below, and it doesn't cost any money. Sign up and you get a free watercolor lesson along with the line art so you can follow along. Okay, back to the video. And we're back. Now I'm working on outlining one of Pot Roast's wings. I am using a reference of a snowy owl wing that I saw as like a vintage drawing. So I have a lot of trouble doing wings because there are so many feathers, but I like to work in a loose style. My challenge is putting in the detail that says that it's a wing and that I know what wings and feathers look like, but without getting too detailed, outlining every single feather, every single shaft. And so that is a challenge that I have, is mixing the loose and detailed, the lost and the found. And as you can see, in that outline, I don't want a hard outline, so I am blurring things away to create the lost and found edges. And I want that color to seep into other areas, again, because I want a cohesive look, not so paint by numbers. And because I don't have a sketch, I need to really make sure early on in my painting that I get my proportions right, because then everything else I build out is based on the proportions I set. And I got so excited painting on a new super big piece of paper that for the composition I had planned, I made Pot Roast's head just a little too big, and so I had to base everything else off of that, which turned out fine. I still got to get in all of the body parts that I wanted to, but it was also still a learning experience for me. So if I paint Pot Roast again, I'll probably try and paint him just a little smaller. And maybe next time I'll do a colorful wash first and then paint him on top, creating the white with maybe some gouache or watercolor ground or scrubbing the paper. So what I'm doing now, I went and put in the suggestion of the back wing and have added the spots that are on a snowy owl's chest, as well as just hints that those are feathers before they come into the fur. I've moved back to the forewing, front wing, however you want to say that, and am putting in like the dots and stripes that you see on the wings. I've made my paper wet so that whenever I put the pigment on, it blooms and softens. Now I'm dragging my brush through the pigment that's already there. I wetted the brush and took off any excess pigment so that whenever I drag it through those dots I've already created, it drags the pigment so that when I go into white areas, it leaves color, but when I go through the areas that already have color, it lifts the paint off. And it just creates a nice convincing effect, dropping in some of that magic wizard onto the lower part of Pot Roast's chest to give some warmth. My painting's looking pretty cold, and all of that gold is up at the eyes, and I do want to bring some of that down, but also to signify the transition of owl to pug. And a lot of the time you'll just see me drop in other colors just to create visual interest, just for fun. And I encourage you to do it too. And it's a lot of fun, especially if you have colors that split, because a lot of the Rockwell Canada paints that I have do split. So for example, Magic Wizard, it can go on a nice dark, warm brown, but you can get some really bright yellows and even subtle shades of pink. Whereas with Paliba Diamond Blue, it goes on as like this blue-green, but if it splits enough, you can start to see hints of a cooler, almost purpley blue. And yet, the colors don't clash. They work very well together, which can be another difficulty, which might be another reason why I usually gravitate toward those two colors, because I already know how nicely they play together. Now I'm mapping out the toes of the talons and the forearm, and bringing in some of the paint that I put into the shadow that would be pot roast belly into the arm, because I can always go back in later when the paint is dry to separate those two areas out with additional shadows. But while the painting is wet, dragging that pigment in, I say it time and time again, and I'm going to keep saying it, for cohesion. Now I'm adding in some very dark value for those talons. Sprinkling in just a little bit of salt now, just to see if I get any fun texture effects. Spoiler alert, I probably should have done this a lot earlier. The paint at this point had dried enough that I really didn't get the cool effects that you really can get. And mostly it was, I forgot, I had the salt nearby. I just forgot. I got so happy with just painting that it dawned on me, oh wait, there was another thing I was going to do. But it's okay, it still looked brilliant. But if you want to paint pot roast yourself, I would encourage you to try and add some of those little salt effects if you want to, because I personally love using those sort of texture effects. Now I'm adding some shadow to the belly on the other side of that arm, as I also keep saying, just to give form, to give shape, to try and illustrate what is in front of what. By placing a dark value on either side of the leg, it brings the leg forward and shows the viewer that this, going in with a darker paint now, I think this is lapis brown. I don't always pay too much attention to my colors. I'm really just focused on value. And so this particular arm that I'm doing, it's in shadow. It's important that it's there so that I show that my Griffet has two forearms. I've put detail into the front so you know what it's supposed to look like. And then the one on the back, it's there, but it's in shadow. And by making it a darker value and not giving it the popping colors that we see on pot roast belly, it illustrates that this arm is behind the belly. And now I'm working on the foot. I don't know if you can see, but I put on a couple like those little paw pads that you see on a doggy's foot. And to illustrate the bottom of the foot, I just used some broken dotted lines to sort of illustrate fur and texture. Now that the majority of the painting has dried, I am going in and adding in some detail. So I'm giving more form to pot roast eyes by making some of the edges darker. I do love lost and found edges. It creates a lot of visual interest, and gotta give the viewer some credit. Let there be some mystery they can figure out based on the information I've given that is an eye. At least I really hope they can. And so what I'm doing is making parts of the eye wet, dropping in some of the dark so that it fuses, so it's not such a hard line. But I did find that in this case, I did want to add a bit of a dark line that you see on a snowy owl's eye. However, on some owls, you really do see a very large pupil. I decided to forego the pupil, and I did that just because I loved this glassy look that I'd gotten with the eyes, and I didn't want to add a pupil. It was just an artistic choice, so you add whatever you want to your animal's eyes. And this is really the part of the painting where I'm just going to be going and darkening values in certain areas to create shadow and shape, or correcting any segments that I think might need to have a shape adjusted. And so watercolor does get what is the word? It has a reputation for being unforgiving. And I guess there is some truth in that. It does make people a little scared to do watercolor because they think they can't correct a mistake. And while maybe you can't do it in the same way you can with acrylics or oils, it is possible to reshape things. And if anything, I think it gives the artist an opportunity to really flex their imagination. How do they get themselves into a situation that they're happier with? And usually the answer is pop in a few dark values in a few places. And now I'm just adding some more contrast between that forearm, foreleg, that piece of the animal, and its belly. And I'm using the Palaiba Diamond Blue because I really just love that color. I don't like when dark value automatically means dull, dark black. But of course, I did add more of that lunar blue to tone down that brightness a bit. And now I'm moving on to the tail of the pug, because I love their little curly tails, but this tail is tucked under the wing, and I've gotten a little too close to the edge of my paper. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I want to put this tail in, keeping it convincing while not like having it seem like an afterthought. And so the curl of the pug's tail has a very dark value because it's a shadow, so I just put in a modeled, very brushstroke-like shadow, and then put some other shadows on the dark, kind of like what I did for the bottom of the foot, in broken strokes to suggest fluffiness, and doing that with negative painting. And all negative painting means is, instead of painting the object itself, you are painting around the object to give it form. Going back into the wing, I like the wing as it is, but it also says to me that I'm not confident with wings, and I cannot have that. So I'm going in and adding more strokes to suggest the feathers and the shafts to show that I'm not afraid of painting this wrong. But compared to the rest of Pot Roast, the wing was just a little too loose, and I get it. Sometimes it's a little scary to, especially when you've spent so long on a painting, and watercolor paper, really nice paper, is expensive. And so I get it. It can be scary because it's like, oh no, if I mess it up now, all that time I've spent goes away, and this lovely piece of paper is ruined. And I get that. I feel that all the time. But if I want to grow as an artist, I just got to suck it up. And if I do mess up, I need to figure out how to get out of it. And luckily, a lot of the paints I like to use, it's a pro and a con. I like to use granulating paints that lift beautifully. And so the good news with that is, if I do screw up, I can usually lift the pigment off the page and then let it dry, and then go in with something darker to reshape things. The bad news is, if you are someone who really likes glazing, and glazing is putting like a bunch of thin layers to slowly build up a painting, this kind of paint that I like to use, with how easily it lifts, will be infuriating, because you'll go and put down a glaze and it shifts the pigment underneath and creates mud. So you might hear that a lot. It's like, you don't want to create mud. Mud is usually created from overmixing or not understanding the property of your pigments and trying to glaze something that is just not going to glaze. And I did enough paintings of my in-laws' dog to really fully understand some of my pigment properties, and that glazing was not gonna work. So that is another bit of encouragement, is to definitely go play with your pigments to really understand their strengths and their weaknesses, so that when you do go into these bigger paintings, you can go in with confidence, knowing how to approach certain things. Now that all my watercolor is dry, I'm going to go in with a little bit of gouache for some highlights. The talons did get cut off at the bottom of my screen, but I'm just adding little bits of highlights to the talons, making them all nice and shiny and so deadly looking. That's right, pot roaster, so deadly. And adding some shine to the eyes and just adjusting that gouache as I need. Another tip I'm going to give is don't go too heavy on your gouache. If you are the sort of person who wants to add those little highlights at the end, I am not a watercolor purist. Go for it. It can be a fantastic way to reclaim some light or even give a shift of light, because my eyes, I thought, were nice and glassy. I left good highlights, but then popping a little bit of gouache on, just because it is a different color than the white of the paper, even though it's both white. I mean, I'm sure you can look at white things and there are a bunch of different shades of white. So it just gives a little extra dimension that I really like. And anywhere that I think just needs a little pop of shine, it's fantastic. But don't go too heavy on your gouache. And yeah, that's my stuff there. My painting is done. Let me know what you think of pot roast, and if there are any other mythical creatures, or really anything you want to see me paint, just let me know in the comments below. If you liked this video, press that like button so I know to make more like it, and if you want to see more from me, press that subscribe button because I post videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. Happy painting! Bye!